On today's episode of Dance Med Spotlight, I'm speaking with Dr. Matthew Wyon. He is a dance medicine and science researcher out of the UK, involved in the community for many years, involved in a lot of different organizations within the community as well, working with doctoral students in the research space around dance. So a lot of different touch points for him in the community for sure. In this episode, there's information that is going to be helpful for dancers themselves, the folks who support dancers, whether it's artistic directors, studio owners, competition owners, and then also folks who are on the health, wellness, or fitness side of things, supporting dancers in that way. We talk about physiological demands, what stresses we have on our body that are helpful, which ones maybe we need to pay a little bit of attention to, and maybe the ways that we're not stressing our bodies in the ways that we might assume. We talk about relative energy deficiency, a mismatch in energy in and energy out, and what that means for dancers as far as health and wellness. We also talk a lot about ways that we can maybe consider approaching training, talking about early specialization with dance, training hours, the importance of rest and recovery, maybe some alternate ways to think about how we're structuring a week or a certain period of time for dancers to make sure that we are helping them perform at their best, keeping them safe and healthy, and giving them longevity in their dance career, whatever that means for them, and allowing to leave the dance world on their terms because they choose to, not because their body makes the decision for them, also allowing them to be a healthy and happy human later in life. There are so many different pieces that we talk about here for the dancers themselves. And then we also talk about some professional development opportunities for people who are working with dancers, whether you're dance educators or health and wellness professionals. So this is jam-packed with tons of amazing information. Please make sure that you listen to the whole episode because you are guaranteed to walk away with some great information. Welcome back to another episode of Dance Med Spotlight, where we talk about all things dance medicine and dance science. Today's guest is someone who's been involved in the dance medicine and dance science world for quite a while and worked as a strength and conditioning coach with dancers. Welcome, Dr. Matthew Wyon.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So one of the first questions that I always like to ask guests is what got you into this area of doing so much research involving dance?
I used to do ballet and from the ages of 4 to 16. And I realized my skill ability in dance was waning fast as every grade I took, I got one grade less. And so I realized my coordination wasn't probably the best. And at the same time, I was playing sport, and that's an all-boys school who none of them realised I danced. And I tore my hip flexor playing rugby because I was probably too flexible from doing dance. And so that stopped the dance. And then when I went to university, I went to somewhere in West London, and Wombe Dance School was situated in the grounds. And so I used them for my first dissertation, my undergrad dissertation. I looked at eating attitudes and tried to give them a nutritional supplement as my first sort of undergrad and my first bit of research with dancers. But I've worked, and then it started off from there. So my master's was on Wombe dancers again, and then my PhD on contemporary/modern dancers.
And now looking at the research that you are involved in, and it's quite the list of things that you've been involved in over the years and areas of interest. You talk about a lot of different things with the physiological demands of dance, looking at stressors on the body of different styles of dance. Let's maybe talk a little bit first about that physiological side of things. Maybe for our folks who aren't the health and wellness or medical professionals, what does physiological demand mean in the first place?
Okay, so I am at heart an exercise physiologist, a sports scientist. So, and really, when we look at that physiology, we're looking at your engine. I think the easiest way is looking at it from a car perspective. When you go out and buy your car, you have a certain engine size in it. And that is what I've been sort of studying for most of the time. It's looking at that engine, but also I suppose the human body is quite interesting because we have a central engine, our heart and lungs, and that sort of central part, and then we have our peripheral engines, which is the muscles and what the muscles can achieve. So we've got the two components, and that's what makes up our exercising body, which, yeah, is the answer to life for me.
Yes, I love that. So, one of the things that I think anyone involved in the dance world can appreciate is that dancers do some incredible things. They ask some incredible challenges of their bodies, but sometimes we don't know some of the best ways to support the body and the engine, like you're talking
Yeah.
about, the physiology of things. One of those things that often comes up as we're talking about it on the medical side is this idea of relative energy deficiency. We've had other terms like the female athlete triad, low energy availability. So, what are some of these things that we're talking about with those topics?
So dance is quite interesting, and that's why I chose it rather than looking at sport, because it's not about first past the post. It's not who can jump the furthest, who can run the fastest, throw whatever. So it's something different, and this is one of the interesting things. So we know that to carry out this beautiful movement on one side, we need to use our bodies. To do this beautiful movement and the high skill involved actually reduces the intensity I can exercise at. I always use the example of you've got three people going to run 100 meters. We've got the sprinter who does 100 meters. We've got a hurdler, and then we've got a dancer. So the sprinter will zoom down and win in 10 seconds. The hurdler will come second in 2 seconds behind, and then the dancer takes 4 days because that's part of the choreography. And so the body's being used totally differently from some competitive activity forms.
Yes.
And so when we introduce high skill, we suddenly have to reduce intensity so we can do that skill, which actually means that we don't burn that much energy while we're dancing. Now, often it feels as though we do, and often the less skillful you are, the more energy you'll burn. But the more skill, so the professional dancers are often, when we test them, are often quite unfit because they're so skillful. So their economy of movement is amazing. So we have this activity we're doing. Often we do long hours of it, but actually it's at quite a low energy demand. So we now find ourselves in a place where I have an aesthetic which the industry requires, what my body looks like, but the activity that I do will not necessarily give me that body that I need. Unlike, say, distance runners, they have to run a lot. So actually that running a lot gives them that sort of physique that they need to achieve it, or they don't actually manage to compete or compete competitively. They don't perform well. Dance, on the other hand, any body, or not any, but any sort of physical body can probably skillfully do that. But often then they say, oh, but we need you to look like this. And so we have this thing then of long hours, but not necessarily huge energy output. And then to maintain this body look, I need to then potentially reduce my energy intake.
Mm-hmm.
And so relative energy deficiency is intentional or unintentional energy deficiency, i.e. there's an imbalance between how much I'm eating compared with how much energy I'm expending. And so that's the format. So as you said earlier, that we had the female athlete triad, and that started in 1992. That first sort of came about and was defined, and it was thought it was only a female thing. And
Mm-hmm.
now Mountjoy, she agreed it was female in 2014. And then in her 2018 update, they actually said, aha, males can get this as well. And so now we're seeing, even though it's potentially more prevalent, or the in females, and potentially there's a bigger physiological and medical detrimental sort of effects in the females compared with the males, it is both sexes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, our body is just not eating enough, end of the day, to achieve what it needs to achieve to be healthy.
And like you mentioned in there as well, it can impact a lot of other things. We can see where if we're having that imbalance of energy input and energy output for anybody, not a just dancer, we may have changes in injury risk, bone density, all kinds of other health things that come along with that. What are maybe some of the other big ones that we might see in relation to this energy imbalance?
So the biggest one, say, for females is the menstrual cycle. And we
Mhm.
start seeing either irregular or secondary amenorrhea, i.e. total cessation of periods, or even worse, they never start.
Mhm.
And so we know, and we've seen in dancers, I don't say we know, that's a bit generalization. We've seen in dancers that often they've got a delayed start of the menses anyway, usually about 2-3 years. Sometimes it just doesn't occur depending on their training load and their amount of energy they take in. And I think, and so that then affects the whole gynecological system and the hormonal system. And attached to that, as you said, is bone mineral density. And so often we look at, if a dancer's getting maybe 1 or 2 stress fractures or bone stresses in a year, we test them to see if they're all okay, and that will go back. So relative energy deficiency is more they call it a diagnosis by elimination,
Mhm.
that we say, okay, this person's come in with these symptoms. Is it this? No, it's not. So we might do ultrasound of the womb to make sure they haven't got any other sort of causes of their symptoms.
Mhm.
But the other weird thing, not the weird thing, the interesting thing is, especially at the elite end, the professionals, they're not normal people. We're looking at elites, so we're not. So we've got our general bell curve, and we're looking at like the half a percenters at one end. So they don't follow the normal patterns that we see for other people.
Mhm.
And so at the moment we're following a bunch of dancers at the moment over a 2-year period, and we have people who we would assume to have reds, but
Mhm.
actually they don't, because they are naturally like this. So in
Mhm.
some ways, those people aren't the issue. It's those people, and there was a term in the 70s they called thin fat people.
Yep.
They are thin people. They are people who are maintaining a thinner body than is naturally for them, and that is the person that we've got to look after. And at Birmingham Royal Ballet with Nick Allen, we've changed the emphasis very much to how do dancers leave the company. We want them to leave healthy. We want them to leave with not an increased risk of osteoporosis in later life. And they've got a short career, but we want them to have a nice life after their career, and not thinking, oh my golly, I've got this and this problem because of my dance career. We should be able to have both together, being healthy and having an awesome dance career.
Yes. And that is something that I so appreciate, having impacts from all of the research like you're doing and other folks are doing, so that we have a better understanding of how we can support dancers throughout their career, whatever that means.
Yeah.
As opposed to, I think, in the past, we've heard a lot of people pushing their bodies to the limit and then having to quit dancing because their body says, no, I will not do this anymore.
Yeah.
And then, like you were saying, going into later life, then having even more problems, using canes at an early age because their joints are so painful, all kinds of different things. So yeah, I think that is such an important point to all of this, as well as then the implementation of all of this to support the dancers.
Yeah, it is. I think it's fundamental. We're seeing more of it in sort of sport when we look at concussions, and we've got that now in dance. But we still, unlike the sports people, and it's not it doesn't have a major effect. It's like they get proper wages at elite, professional sport. Dancers aren't getting that, and so they'll have to work. They'll have to do something else. I can always remember my first dance teacher was called Mrs. Ricketts. She didn't have rickets, but I just thought it was an excellent name for somebody who is, potentially prone to having rickets again. But again, it was just it is it's a tough profession. It's not the hardest profession. I saw on social media again this whole thing coming up. Dance is the hardest profession anywhere. It's not. It's different. It's not the hardest. We don't have people trying to impale us into the ground when we're dancing. Everyone on stage is there for this common goal to be able to do something together, rather than half the people on the pitch trying to kill you. And so, but we have an injury incidence and prevalence similar to contact sports, which again is like, why are we having that? And then we look at where the injuries occur. And the other interesting thing is, in sport, we get the injuries when they're competing, when they're in their matches, and very little in training. Dance is the other way around. So we're getting injuries in the class and in the rehearsal period more than in the performance. In theory, the class and rehearsal period is where it should be the most controlled, where we can look after them and we can, protect them a bit better. There's an interesting thing that we are seeing the injuries there. It could be that what we're doing is doing the dangerous stuff there, so that we overcome that dangerous stuff for when we perform. So it is an interesting balance, and how we can look at how we can manipulate training environments or teacher training. And again, this is something which I want to always emphasize. Sport doesn't have the answers. Some sports are really good, other sports are awful, and so it doesn't. So it's not saying, sport is wonderful, dance is so much to learn from sport. We've all got stuff to learn from everybody. Try and get healthy people performing at an elite level, but it requires an interesting person to do that.
Most definitely. And I think one of the things, as you're talking about this idea of sport doesn't have it all figured out, but we can learn from one another. I think one of the areas where we've been learning a bit from sport is also thinking about cross training and strength and conditioning training and things like that, that maybe, again, weren't traditionally part of a dancer's experience going through their training. And I remember even as a young dancer, where sometimes you would hear, don't lift weights, it's going to make you bulky. You shouldn't run because it's going to develop the wrong muscles. And, it was a long list of don't do these other things. Don't play other sports because you're going to hurt yourself. And then you can't come and do the show that you're supposed to do. But we have been learning that there is a lot of benefit from incorporating strength and conditioning, cross training, all of those different sorts of things.
Yes, it's essential. And again, Actually, one of the interesting things from sport that's come out is this: don't do early specialization.
Hmm.
And that again is something which is still promoted within the sort of, especially the ballet community. In fact, until you're probably up to 16, diversity of movement patterns from different activities is essential. So it'll just make you, and especially nowadays when there's no dance will just be a certain genre. Every ballet company or every company does so many different genres now. You
Yes.
need to have that diversity of movement available to you.
Hmm.
And so the other thing, the interesting thing, I've got a slight bee in my bonnet, not bee in my bonnet, I'll call it bee in my bonnet, about is with S&C, it's important, it's fundamental, yes,
Hmm.
but again, dancers aren't athletes. So we need to see a slight increase in engine size. So going back to the car engine, we might need to go from a 1.2 to maybe a 1.4, maybe a 1.6, but we don't need to get up to the 2.5 litre, 3 litre sort of thing.
Hmm.
That is for what I call grunt sports. That's when there's not much skill involved and it's all about exercise. It's all about physiology. How fast can I run? How row, ski, or whatever it is. And that's when there's lower skill, but it's all about how do I maximize my physiology to perform optimally. Dance isn't that. So we need to improve a bit, but not huge amounts. So that again will determine how much time I spend doing strength and conditioning.
Hmm.
We've seen benefits of doing 2 half-hour, 1 hour, or 1 hour a week session a week. And we've seen benefits, and we've seen benefits in their dancing. So not just strength and stuff. We did some research with, they did a dance class before and afterwards, or a dance sequence, and they were marked before and afterwards, but blind. The dance teachers didn't know if they were before and after. And all those who did the intervention improved their dancing. So it does have a direct benefit onto it. And I suppose the controversial sort of area which we've started to examine is Pilates.
Mm-hmm.
Now, again, maybe hopefully you won't get too much hate mail on this one. I'm not a big Pilates fan, and there's two main reasons. One, the evidence isn't really good. There's not much evidence to show the benefits of Pilates for dancers. So the hours they spend, can we see an improvement in their dancing or in their alignment or anything? We often end up doing it because we think it's good. It's like a myth sort of thing without that evidence. At the moment, if this had been a medicine we were taking, none of us would be taking it because the
Hmm.
evidence isn't there to say, yes, this is really, really good. And one of my students at Texas A&M has just finished her PhD looking at Pilates and contemporary
Hmm.
dance. And it wasn't good, conclusive evidence that there was a benefit. Mainly because I think it doesn't put enough stress through the body. So I think it's useful if you're injured and you're coming back from injury and you want to either switch on muscles or help with alignment. And it could be very beneficial there. But if you're whole and healthy and dancing, you need to put more force through the body.
Hmm.
And that's
And
what it doesn't do.
I think when we're thinking about this, cross training or training outside of dance class and technique classes and that sort of thing, I think things like Pilates and yoga are easy places for folks to go to. It
Yeah.
feels very dance
Nice. Yeah.
based and all of that. We also know that asking our bodies to do other movements and maybe balancing out some of the things that we don't use so much in our dance. So, for example, ballet dancers, we live and turn out, but how much
Yes.
do we train our internal rotators of the
Yeah.
hip that go the other direction to maintain
Yeah.
some of that balance? So, finding things that are varied from what we're normally doing in whatever dance genres we're involved in, and then making sure we have enough stress on our system to create change over time. I think those are two big ones, while also not adding to overtraining
No.
for the body.
So I think this is the big thing, and this is why I say we need to look. We only need small improvements. We don't need huge improvements. And again, one of the problems we see is when people think, "Oh, I've got to go to the gym," and they start seeing that, "Oh, I have to spend an hour at the gym." It's like, no, you can actually get enough stress on your body in probably 20 minutes, half an hour. And you do 2 of those, that's all you need to do in a week, because you're already doing lots of dancing. So we don't need, again, we're looking at that small improvement. We're not looking at, I need to be really big, I need a small improvement, and to recognize the stresses you're putting on your body already through dancing. So we don't actually need that much. So that whole thing, 3 times a week, for 1 hour is not right. As long as you do focused training in that shorter period, we can still get that adaptation. The difference is it has to be vigorous. So it has to be, you have to work hard. If you sit around watching on your phone, yes, it can take an hour and a half or whatever it is you want to, or taking pictures of you doing it. But it's not, if you go and say, I'm going to do this and get out, you can actually do it in a short period of time.
Which is really important for people to hear as well, because we know dance schedules can be insane. And especially if we're thinking about whether it's adolescent dancers who also are in school, adult dancers who likely have other jobs outside of their primary dance job. Time is important, and being able to be efficient with that time is key.
Yes, and this comes down to a plea and an argument and a persuasion, I think, to artistic directors and for managers of dance companies and schools to say this training should be part of their schedule. And it's not something, just the same as rehab, should be part of the schedule. I think all companies say this is extra on top of their contracted hours. It's not part of their contracted hours. It should be part of their contracted hours. It should be recognized that we need to give them 2 hours a week for supplemental training as part of their 38 hours contract, whatever it is, and have that, and so that recognizes that at the moment it doesn't. So again, they're already dancing a lot, and then they say, on top of that, I've got to do this and this and this. So it's not good. But I'll put a little proviso on that one. So we did a study looking at activity levels in dancers over 24 hours for a week, and we did 2 weeks, and we used 2 different companies in the UK, and we noted that actually the amount of activity they did outside of their training time, their employment time, was as much as they did inside it. So when they say they're fatigued and overworked and tired, there's a suggestion they're doing as much outside than they're doing inside. So in fact, a lot of that tiredness can be controlled by their own decisions on what they decide to do. So it sounds awful. Sometimes I see them and I think, and that's when I've got to remember that I'm dealing with artists and creatives rather than sports people. They've got to say, actually, sometimes I need to be a bit more professional in how I look after my body outside of my training, so that I can be really creative for my main job. And so sometimes it's getting that mix right and recognizing that it's going to take time to get it right, and that it might mean that you dance longer.
Yes, exactly. And I think on a similar note, thinking about, so I work primarily with adolescent dancers, and one of the things that often comes up for them is if they are dealing with pain or injury, and I give them recommendations of, we need a temporary break from dance so that we can let your body heal and help recover. Any of those kinds of things. Maybe we modify things temporarily, and so we can get them back to dance. A lot of times there is a lot of resistance,
Panic
saying,
that they're missing.
yes, I'm missing class. I'm not with everybody else. I'm letting my team down. My teacher's going to be mad at me. That's one of my favorite quotes that I hear quite often. And not appreciating, despite the conversations that we have, of thinking about the longevity of things, and especially the dancers who tell me that they have an aspiration of being professional dancers down the road. It's like, that's why this is so much more important to talk about also. So that can also be one of the challenges.
I think rest is, and we're seeing it in sport as well, rest is the most unrecognized and underplanned training program that you have.
Mm-hmm.
Again, coming back to our body and we needing stress, but our body needs rest for the stress to adapt, for it to adapt to the stress. So otherwise it never adapts. So we're a reactive mechanism. We are both sat down at the moment. Probably if we could, we'd both be lying down, because our body likes to find that the position of least energy expenditure. How can it conserve everything? And part of that is because when we stress it, it needs to say, oh, that's hard. I now need to try and adapt my mechanisms to be able to cope with that new stress. And so we're very reactive beings. So we're not saying, oh, I need to get fit. And I sit there, and we both sit here now, and we think ourselves fitter and say, hey, presto, we can go off and run a marathon quickly. We need that stress, but we need that time then to recover. So if we do like a dance day, we could need 8 to 10 hours to recover from that. And that's recovery needs to include good nutrition. So, and proper sleep and deep sleep. So again, it's making sure we get good nutrition before we go to bed, and then really, really good deep sleep to allow the hormones to be released for the repair to occur, for us to be ready for the next day. And so rest is something which needs to be planned.
Definitely. And something that I think in the dance world, we generally are not great about.
No.
I know a lot of my young dancers that I work with, they'll go to 2 or 3 full days of competition and convention, and then they're back to their usual thing on Monday. And so even, if they are going to have class, have something gentler, more restorative, something where we're not stressing the body, giving all new choreography, trying to learn some new aerial trick, whatever that they might be wanting to throw in there.
So I think that comes down to the dance teachers, the power element. And if they could recognize that and say, actually, there's a low day. You've all been away this weekend competing. There's no class Monday, Tuesday. We'll come back Wednesday and we can then start doing it. And if it comes from them, then I think it'll be amazing. So, but again, I suppose it's that worry. So if I don't do that class, are the dancers going to be okay for the next competition? It's that risk and that worry and letting go. So we spent 10 years doing some work over at a dance school in the Netherlands, and looking at introducing periodization and less dance into their vocational training. So they went down to much lower amounts. They did hard days, easy days, hard period, recovery periods. So we changed the whole thing, and we ended up with less injuries, and we ended up with dancers getting better jobs, which is just as important. So it's no good having less injured dancers who still weren't performing amazingly, but the school ended up with better job prospects for their dancers, and that's like a win-win. But again, it was hard to sell it to the dancers, because they thought, I need to dance more. It's like, no. We've got a plan here. It might seem scary, but there is a plan. And so it's the artistic director told it to the teachers reinforced it to the dancers. We also told the dancers the plan as well. So everyone knew that there was a plan, which I think is the most important thing. So again, with the teacher saying, the reason why we're not doing class on Monday after our thing is I need you to recover. You've just done a really hard 2 days. Your body needs to recover. Let's have Monday off. We'll come back maybe Tuesday, Wednesday, and we'll start then. But you need to start fresh. Otherwise, you're going to start tired, and you're not going to learn anything. Again, it's that reinforcement to say, a bit of rest is going to be beneficial in the long run. And also, if you think about it, an adolescent dancer is going to do, I don't know, 400 classes maybe in a year. So if you miss the 1 or the 2, it's not the end of the day. And if you think over their 6-10 years of training, if they lose less than 10%, it's not going to affect them, because it's about the quality, not the quantity. And that is the other thing to really push is if you're alert, you're not fatigued, then your quality of dancing is going to be so much better. And that's what learning is. So rather than coming in tired and making mistakes and taking longer to learn, actually that's when less is more and it's better.
Definitely. And we've seen where dancers or athletes, anyone who is fatigued, is more likely to get injured if they continue pushing through. We've been talking about the importance of the recovery piece. I mean, there's so much benefit from having that downtime. And I think one thing that I've also seen from the dance educator's perspective is a concern that, well, okay, I'm hearing this, I'm understanding this, I want to implement this, but there are 20 other studios around me that aren't doing it.
Yeah.
And so, if they're not able to communicate and convince the parents and the dancers that this is beneficial, they're going to say, but they get more training over here.
Yes.
That must be better. So then there's that concern of losing students because of that change.
And that is the risk. And it took me 8 years to find an artistic director willing to take a risk and to change their program to do this. And so it is scary. But the interesting thing on the fatigue, and this is where something which I think sport needs to relearn from dance, is dancers, even when they're really fatigued, can still do high quality precision movements. We don't see that in sport. So this is the interesting. So some colleagues were having this argument all the time. It's like, if we change the training too much, we might lose this ability to be able to do this because we've lost it in sport.
Mm-hmm.
So there's something good. It's not, we're not saying everything in dance training is wrong. Actually, there's some stuff there which we need to understand better to be able to promote better, because we see this benefit. And actually, it's where sport can come in and say, aha, that's why you're so good at this fine motor skill.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's more questions than there are answers. And hopefully, I've been doing it now for 30 plus years now. And what the nice thing is, there's so many questions still to answer.
Right.
To try and find out, understand. But the hardest thing as well is to understand that it takes a long time to find out these answers.
Mm-hmm.
I had a colleague at Birmingham Royal Ballet. I said, should the dancers be on vitamin D? And it took 3 years to turn around to him and say yes.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the hard thing. So from a scientific perspective, it took us 5 experiments to turn around and say, yes, they should be on vitamin D all year round, not just in the winter.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's that science takes sometimes a long time to answer a simple question. And it might sound as though we're going round the Wrekin, as we say in the UK, sort of, to be able to get from A to B. But hopefully then when we do it, we'll have strong evidence to say, yes, this works or this doesn't work.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I'm sure comes with all of it too, as you're saying, there's still a lot of questions. I'm sure every time that you are having the data and coming to, being able to analyze those results and see what this means, there are also 10 other questions, 20 other questions that have come up in the process. I always feel like the more I learn, the more questions I end up having, compared to my very naive self while I was still in school, thinking, I'm done studying, I'll learn some stuff along the way, but I'm good.
I think that's why I ended up becoming a research professor. End of the day, it is the best thing in the world. I'm just finding out why or how all the time. And I have the joy of, I think about 12 PhD students now looking at dance medicine and science. And that's what we do. And often they end up thinking, I'm going to look at something big, and they end up looking at something really, really small. But then we'll answer that question really nicely and smallly. And so it's that gradual thing, and it is wonderful, because I think when I see dancers dance, when I see performances, I think it's beautiful. It is just outstanding. And then I look at what's forming that foundation, and sometimes you're thinking they're nearly doing everything possible to have a bad performance, but they're doing it in spite of so many things. And how can we help to reduce those negative factors so that they can even dance better or dance longer or dance healthier? And if we can do that, then that's, well, I've got another 20 years probably, or 10, 15 years before I retire, so I can say, done. I've done that little bit there, and I feel that they say, yes, actually, we've now got people who are dancing for as long as they want to, and they can retire because they want to retire, not because they're forced to retire.
Yes, that's a lovely come full circle from early in our conversation with things.
Yes.
I want to switch gears a little bit, still thinking about some of the other things that you have been involved in. Big one, of course, is being involved in IADAMS, the International Association for Dance Medicine and Science. You've been president of the organization. You've been involved in the research committee and chair there. Now you're chair of the professional development committee. And I know you've presented at some of the past conferences about some of the things that you're working on there.
Yes.
I think it would be great if you could share a little bit about some of the professional development side for our dance medicine and science folks to learn about.
So some of it is a bit of our association playing a bit of catch up with other associations out there. And so one of the things that used to really bug me is people say, oh, I'm a dance scientist. And I'm thinking, there's no such thing really as dance science. So for instance, I see myself as an exercise physiologist who researches dance. Even though we did used to have a dance science master's here. And then we'd have a exercise biomechanist who looks at dance. And so other people talking to clinicians, they said, oh, I'm a dance expert. And it's like, okay, so what do you mean by dance expert? And anyone can call them, and this is the problem at the moment, anyone can call themselves a dance expert. And so one of the drivers I had, and I had two things I needed sort of out of my presidency I wanted to complete. One was having fellowship recognition for academics within dance, medicine and science. And the other one was getting some sort of benchmarking for what is a dance expert. And so we've spent the last 4 years trying to find out, say, if you were a PT, what underlying degrees you should have, what further skills you should be able to have, what memberships you should be signed up to do, what CPD you should be doing to be then called a dance expert, physiotherapist. And the nightmare obviously we have within IADAMS, we're not a single country. We are multiple countries. And so say, for instance, I know in the States now, you're DPT.
Yes.
Now that is totally unique to the States. Or I don't think anyone else has taken it on. And so in the UK, we might expect to have a physio, might be expected to have undergrad in physio, maybe a master's in sport and exercise medicine, and etc., some other sort of skills.
Yeah.
Then suddenly we look at some older physios who've only got a BSc, but they've then got 40 years experience. And so we've got to be able to then recognize that person as well.
Yes.
And then we move on to athletic trainers, and then we move on to a strength and conditioning person, a dance teacher. So we've tried to do for every category of professional membership we have at IADAMS, we've tried to develop basic skill requirements that people need to be call themselves a dance expert, or as we call them, is a IADAMS recognized professional.
Yes.
And so for the dance teacher, it might be that you've done an anatomy course or a medical mental first aid course, and you have these other categories that CPD courses that you need to be able to reach that category. So we've set out and done the categories, and this is obviously a living thing, because then suddenly we'll get somebody from Zimbabwe saying, I've just joined IADAMS, and this is the qualifications we need to be recognized as such and such.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got to say, okay, right. And then we've got to take that on board and develop. So it's going to be ever changing. And alongside that is how do we help then the new graduates get the skills needed and the knowledge needed to be able to be recognized. And we're seeing it's probably a 5 to 10 year post graduation sort of journey for them, and say, okay, I know that if I do these sort of courses, get some mentorship, that in 5 to 10 years I can be then classified as a dance expert or a recognized professional. And this comes back to the dance school thing that we were talking about if I do less, but I hopefully then will be able to turn around and say that dance studio is recognized by Adams as having in place really good criteria to look after its dancers. And that will hopefully be as a marketing tool for them to say, look, we know what we're doing. Mm-hmm. We recognize the health and importance of looking after the dancers and be good dance teachers. That's why you should be coming to our school and not the one down the road who they all dance stupid hours and break after a few years. Mm-hmm. We're going to look after your kids. And that's the idea.
Yeah, and I love that. And bringing that back around to the dance schools, I think is so important, because I know I've seen it with some of the professional dancers where if they're looking to join companies, now they're able to go on and research them, talk to people who are part of different companies and learn, well, this one does provide some support when it comes to health and wellness. And it sounds like they have good practices and are concerned about keeping dancers safe, having good longevity, and being able to stop dancing when they choose to, rather than because they have just done so many things along the way and their body says no, versus the companies where it's, oh yeah, people burn out quickly, or it seems like everyone gets injured or whatever. So people are already starting to do some of that research. And so having something like this in place, like you said, can solidify this is a place that recognizes sound practice. Yes. And prioritizing safety for the dancers that they're working with.
So obviously in Adams as well, they've got a huge committee that's doing safe practice and safeguarding for dancers as well, which is really, really good. And in the UK, we have One Dance UK, which is a bit like Dance USA, but I think it's been going slightly longer. And also as part of that, we have a group of dance organisations which is set up about, must be 10 years, maybe plus a bit more ago, called the National Institute of Dance Medicine and Science. And from that, this year, hopefully we're soft launching or launching a charter for good practice within dance schools and companies. And that's looking at all of how they look after the dancers, from their safeguarding policies, whether they have on-site medical attention, or do they have, if they haven't, do they have a pathway to be able to refer people down to the appropriate people? Mm-hmm. So we've got gold, silver and bronze, and it's aimed at vocational pre-professional schools, it's aimed at recreational private studios, and it's also aimed at companies as well. Mm-hmm. So the companies so a dancer can say, oh, this company has on site a full medical multidisciplinary team. It has really good referral pathways. It has policies in place that look after me as a dancer. And so hopefully they'll say, oh, I prefer to go there than maybe to that company, obviously if they have that choice and they're selected, because they recognise that they're going to be looked after much more holistically.
Yes, and that's amazing.
If it works in the UK, I'd like to be able to then say to Adams, or we say to Adams, here we go. It's worked here, worked in this country. Offer this possibility to other countries and have a go at doing it. Mm-hmm. And again, I think from a school perspective, from a marketing thing, it'll mean that your school has got this little charter. We're being recognised for what we do and how we look after the dancers, and that will hopefully give them one up from the competition again.
Exactly. There really is so much support already in place or in process to help dancers one way or another, whether it's supporting the studios and companies or supporting the dancers directly, which is amazing. At this point, I think it's a good opportunity for a special segment of every episode. On every episode of Dance Med Spotlight, we have the final bow, essentially the take home message. We've talked about a lot of different things, but if people walked away with one or two pieces of information, what do you hope that they walk away with?
That's a very good question. Um,
So much.
Less is more. It's quality, not quantity, of how you train. And for women, your menstrual cycle is the most important thing you have. It tells us that you're healthy.
Mhm.
And being healthy means that you have a long career. And that's, again, the most important. And a good life after dance.
Yes. I think that's the most important part. Also, this is your opportunity, the shameless plug. Anything that you would like to promote that you have going on or promote organizations that you're a part of, this is your opportunity. So the floor is yours.
I would promote IADAMS and its new mechanized professional concept, as I think that will hopefully be a game changer for our dance profession. To promote more research, to find stuff out. And I suppose within this, unless dance schools open their doors to us researchers, we as researchers can't find meaningful results for you.
Mm-hmm.
And so it has to be a symbiotic relationship. And I've been so lucky in my career in the UK to have, mainly through One Dance UK, been given open access to so many dance companies and dance schools to find stuff out, because we need to use the dancers themselves to find answers for dancers. They're not like normal people.
Mm-hmm.
They're different, and we need to understand how they move, how they understand things, how they think about things, to try and help them perform better and for longer.
Most definitely. Well, thank you so much for your time today. It was great getting to chat with you, and I really look forward to hearing what people are able to take away from this episode, because we did cover so much important information.
Well, thank you ever so much. I really enjoyed it.
Dance Med Spotlight is hosted and produced by Alyssa Arms. We discuss all things dance medicine. This has been another episode from Dance Med Spotlight. The Dance Med Spotlight is intended for educational purposes only. No clinical decision-making should be based solely on one source. While care is taken to ensure accuracy, factual errors can be present.